Sunday morning in August 1984. A man is walking up a low slope of grey gravel in the far north of Kenya, beside a river that has no water in it. The riverbed is called the Nairobi. For most of the year, it is a scar of sand running down toward a lake the color of old glass. He has walked ground like this for 20 years. He walks slowly. He looks at his feet. The slope is covered in broken stone. Most of it is nothing: volcanic grit, weathered basalt, the shattered leftovers of a landscape that has been drying out for a very long time. To almost anyone else, the whole hillside would look like rubble. He stops. He bends down. In his hand is a piece of bone about the size of a matchbox. It is dark and curved, and it has the texture of something that was once part of a living skull. He turns it over. He has held thousands of fragments in his life, and he can tell within seconds whether a bone belonged to an antelope, a pig, a crocodile, or something closer to home. This one is closer to home. He marks the spot. The team begins to dig, and they keep digging, and the hillside keeps giving. A second piece of skull, teeth, then ribs, then, impossibly, a spine. The excavation would run across 5 field seasons. What came out of that slope was not a fragment, and not a skull, and not the usual handful of teeth that human origins is normally built from. It was a body, almost all of one. A boy, laid down in mud on the edge of an ancient lake and left there for 1.5 million years. The man who found him was Kamoya Kimeu. He was born in Kenya, in the hills of Makueni, and he had no formal training in anatomy when he started. The scientific papers that announced the discovery carried other names above his. We will come back to that. Because the strange thing about that morning is not the skeleton. The strange thing is that this same country, in the century before and the century since, has given up more of the human past than anywhere else on the planet. Not one find, hundreds, stretching back beyond 3 million years in an unbroken sequence, in one basin, in one nation. And almost nobody comes here for that. They come for the grass. This is Kenya. More than 55 million people, more than 40 ethnic groups, a coastline on the Indian Ocean, a desert in the north, snow on the equator, and a capital city with a national park inside its own boundary. Most of the world holds a single image of it: golden grass at dawn, a line of wildebeest, a balloon drifting over the Mara. That image is real. It is also about 1% of the country. Because underneath all of it, running the entire length of Kenya from the Ethiopian border to the Tanzanian one, is a crack in the surface of the planet. The continent of Africa is splitting apart, and the seam runs directly through this country. That seam is why the fossils are lying on the surface instead of buried under a kilometre of rock. It is why the lakes here are caustic. It is why hot steam comes out of the ground and turns the lights on in Nairobi. It is why the grass grows where it does and why the animals follow it. Almost every question this country raises has the same answer underneath it. But we will get to how that works. First, we should go to the lake. Lake Turkana lies in the north, in a basin of black lava and wind. It is the largest permanent desert lake on Earth, 250 kilometers long, and it sits in a place where the average temperature runs above 30 degrees, and the rain, in a good year, might total 200 millimeters. Explorers named it the Jade Sea, for the green that algae give the water when the wind drops. It holds the largest population of Nile crocodiles anywhere in the world. They lie along the shorelines in numbers that are difficult to process, and on Central Island, a volcano rising straight out of the lake, they gather in the crater lakes to breed. A large male can pass 5 meters. He can go months without eating and then take an entire year's calories in a single week. What is worth sitting with is the age of the design. The crocodile body plan has been working more or less unchanged for something close to 100 million years. It survived the extinction that ended the dinosaurs. It survived the drying of this basin, the collapse of the lake to a fraction of its old size, and its slow return. Which means that when the first upright creature walked down to this shoreline to drink, the crocodiles were already ancient. They were already waiting. They had already been the most dangerous thing in the water for longer than mammals had existed. We arrived late. They were the ones who watched us come. To understand why any of this is here, you have to go south, and you have to look down. Beneath Kenya, 2 pieces of the African plate are pulling away from each other. The movement is slow, a few millimeters a year, roughly the rate at which a fingernail grows. But it has been going on for something like 25 million years, and over that span, the arithmetic becomes violent. As the plates separate, the crust between them stretches and thins. Thinner crust cannot hold its own weight, so the floor between the 2 shoulders drops. That dropped floor is the Great Rift Valley. In places, it is more than 60 kilometers across, and the walls on either side stand 1,000 meters above it. Thin crust also means that molten rock sits closer to the surface than it should, so the valley floor grows volcanoes: Longonot, Suswa, Menengai. Cones and calderas standing in a line down the middle of the country, most of them younger than our species. And here is where the consequences begin to stack. A dropped floor collects water. Rivers run down off the highlands into the basins and have nowhere to go, because the rift has no outlet to the sea. So the water sits and it evaporates, and everything dissolved in it stays behind. Volcanic ash is rich in sodium carbonate. Century after century, the lakes of the Rift Valley concentrate it until the water is not water in any ordinary sense. It is closer to a weak lie. That same sinking floor also does something quieter and far more important. Every time a lake shrinks, it leaves sediment. Every time a volcano erupts, it lays a sheet of ash across the top of that sediment. Bones and stone tools that fall into the mud get sealed under the next layer, and the next, and the next. A basin that is slowly dropping keeps accepting new layers instead of eroding the old ones away. So Kenya's rift is a recorder. It has been laying down a page at a time for millions of years, and volcanic ash can be dated. Each ash layer carries its own radioactive clock, so a bone caught between 2 of them is not a guess. It sits inside a bracket, above this eruption, below that one. Then the last step. The faults keep moving. They tilt the whole stack sideways, and the seasonal rains cut through it, and layers that should be a kilometer underground are pushed up and sliced open and left lying in the sun. That is why a man walking a gravel slope can find a skull with his eyes. The record is here because the ground writes it down, dates it, and then hands it back. There is one more consequence and this one turns the lights on. South of the lake, at a place called Olkaria, the rock 2 kilometers beneath your feet is running at around 350 degrees. Rainwater seeps down through fractured lava. It hits that heat, and it wants to come back up. In 1981, Kenya became the first country in Africa to drill into that and take the pressure seriously. The steam turns turbines. The water goes back into the ground. Today, geothermal is the single largest source of electricity in Kenya, ahead of hydro, ahead of everything. The plants sit inside a national park called Hell's Gate, so the pipework runs between red cliffs with zebra grazing beneath it, and the steam plumes drift across the gorge like weather. Hold on to that number, 350 degrees, 2 kilometers down. It comes back later on a shoreline 900 kilometers north of here. 90 kilometers to the east, the valley wall climbs, and the country changes completely. Nairobi did not exist in 1898. It was swamp and open plain, and the Maasai name for the cold water running through it was Enkare Nairobi. In 1899, the railway being pushed from Mombasa toward Lake Victoria needed a place to park its equipment before the climb into the highlands, and a depot went up in the mud. That depot is now a city of more than 5 million people, and it holds a contradiction that no other capital carries. Drive 7 kilometers from the central business district and the fence ends. On the other side of it, there are lions. Nairobi National Park is the only national park inside the boundary of a capital city anywhere on Earth, and the animals inside it move against a skyline of tower blocks. It is unfenced on its southern side, so the Plains game still walks out into the Athi Kapiti grasslands and back. The second contradiction is harder to see and larger in its effects. In 2006, roughly a quarter of adult Kenyans had access to any kind of formal financial service. A bank branch might be a full day's travel away, and it might refuse you at the counter for lack of documents. Then, a mobile network launched a service that let people send money as a text message. No branch, no minimum balance. A shopkeeper with a float of cash became the bank. Financial inclusion in Kenya has since climbed past 80%. The value moving across that one platform in a year now exceeds what the entire national economy produces in a year, and the agents who handle the cash number close to 300,000 people. A country where most adults could not open an account became one of the first places on Earth where money stopped being a physical object. And on a rare, clear morning, from the high ground on the northern edge of the city, you can see a mountain on the horizon. It is 150 kilometers away, and for the people who farmed the slopes beneath it, it was the direction you faced when you prayed. We will climb it shortly. But first, the grass, because the image most people carry of this country deserves better than to be dismissed. Southwest of Nairobi, the highlands fall away toward the border, and the land opens into the Masai Mara. The Mara is the northern end of a much larger system. Cross the border, and it becomes the Serengeti. The ecosystem does not know the line is there, and roughly 1.5 million wildebeest, together with several 100,000 zebra and gazelle, spend their entire lives moving around a loop inside it. It is usually described as instinct, a great migration, something ancient and mysterious in the blood. It is not mysterious. It is soil chemistry and rain. In the southeast of the system, volcanic ash from the rift's own eruptions has built a shallow, mineral-rich soil that grows a very short grass, unusually high in calcium and phosphorus. That is exactly what a lactating female needs. So the herds calve there, in the open, where predators can be seen coming. Then the short grass is exhausted, and the rains move, and the animals move with them. West through the woodlands, north across the border, into the Mara in the dry months, because the Mara sits higher and wetter and holds green grass when everything behind them has turned to dust. The river crossings that the whole world photographs are not the point of the journey. They are an obstacle in the middle of it, and the crocodiles in that river know the calendar better than the tourists do. And the last thing worth correcting is the emptiest part of the picture. This is not wilderness. Mara is a Ma word, and it describes land that is spotted the way acacia and shadow speckle the plain. This has been Maasai country for centuries, grazed by Maasai cattle, and a large share of the land the herds cross today is not park at all. It is owned by Maasai families who have leased it into conservancies, agreed to limit their own grazing, and taken a share of the income in return. The lions on that land are there because people who live there decided they should be. North of the Mara, back on the valley floor, there is a string of lakes where almost nothing should be able to live. Bogoria, Nakuru, Elementaita. Their water carries so much dissolved soda that it feels slippery between the fingers, and at Bogoria, the shoreline vents boiling springs and geysers straight out of the gravel. A cut hand does not enjoy this water. Neither does most of the life on the planet. And yet, at certain times of year, the surface of these lakes turns pink from shore to shore with something close to 1 million birds. Why would anything want this? The answer is that caustic water grows one thing extremely well: a blue-green cyanobacterium that thrives in exactly these conditions and would be outcompeted anywhere gentler. It blooms in quantities that turn the whole lake into soup. The lesser flamingo eats almost nothing else. Its bill is the instrument. Held upside down in the water, it works as a pump, drawing liquid in and pushing it out through rows of fine plates that strain out particles a fraction of a millimeter across. The tongue does the pumping several times a second, hour after hour. A single adult can process a volume of lake water each day that dwarfs its own body. The skin on its legs is tough enough to stand in the shallows for hours. Where the lake becomes too strong even for that, the birds walk to freshwater seeps at the edge and drink from them. And in some places, they will drink water hot enough to make a person flinch. It is a life built entirely inside a narrow band of chemistry. Change the concentration and the food fails, which is exactly what has been happening. Over the last 15 years, the Rift Valley lakes have been rising. Not falling, rising. Baringo, Bogoria, Nakuru, Naivasha, all of them climbing, drowning roads and schools and hotels, pushing tens of thousands of people off land their families had held for generations. At Nakuru, the water diluted, the bacterium thinned, and the great flamingo flocks that made the lake famous largely moved on. Nobody has produced a single agreed explanation. Heavier rainfall, changes in the land above the catchments, movement in the rift floor itself. Probably some combination. Remember the rising water. It matters again in the north. 400 kilometers east, the country runs out of land. The Kenyan coast is a strip of coral rag, mangrove and white sand, and it has been connected to the wider world for longer than almost anywhere else in Africa. The reason is the wind. Twice a year, the monsoon reverses. From November, the Kaskazi blows down from the northeast, and for centuries, it carried sailing dhows out of Arabia, Persia, and Western India along this coast in a matter of weeks. From April, the Kusi turns and pushes them home again. Between those two winds, there is a gap of several months. That gap built a civilization. A crew that arrived in December could not leave until April, so they stayed. They traded mangrove poles, ivory, and eventually people for cloth, porcelain, and glass beads. They took local wives. Their children grew up speaking a Bantu language that had absorbed Arabic vocabulary the way a harbor absorbs silt. And the coast gave that language its name, Swahili, the coasts. Kiswahili is now spoken by something on the order of 200 million people. Lamu is the oldest surviving town of that world and the best preserved. It sits on an island off the northern coast, and it has almost no vehicles. Goods move through the alleys on the backs of donkeys, as they have for 700 years. The houses are cut from coral rag and roofed with mangrove timber, arranged around inner courtyards that stay cool in the afternoon, and the doors are carved so heavily that a single frame could take a craftsman months. "90 kilometers down the coast, there is another stone town of the same civilization. Nobody has lived in it for 400 years. Gedi stands in a forest of baobab and fig behind a wall, inland from the sea. Inside it, there is a palace, a great mosque, streets of stone houses, and a system of wells and drains that indicates a serious understanding of how to move water through a town. At its height, it held perhaps 2,500 people. Chinese porcelain has come out of the ground here, Venetian glass, beads from India, and then, at some point in the 17th century, it emptied. The arguments about why have run for decades. Pressure from Oromo groups moving down from the north, a falling water table that left the wells dry, the collapse of the older trading order after Portuguese ships took control of the ports at Malindi and Mombasa, possibly all three arriving together. What is not in doubt is what happened afterward. The forest came back over the walls, roots split the arches. The Mijikenda people of this coast, whose sacred kaya groves stand nearby, treated the site as a place where the ancestors remained, and they were not casual about entering it. In 2024, Gedi became Kenya's 8th World Heritage Site. It is one of the very few ancient Swahili towns anywhere that was never built over, because nobody wanted it back. The forest that swallowed Gedi is itself one of the rarest things on this coast. Arabuko Sokoke is the largest surviving fragment of the coastal forest that once ran in a broken ribbon from Somalia to Mozambique. Most of that ribbon is gone. What is left here is small, and it holds species that exist nowhere else on Earth. One of them weighs about half a kilogram and can outrun you. The golden-rumped sengi looks like a strange cross between a shrew and a small antelope, with a long, flexible snout it uses to probe leaf litter for insects. The patch of gold on its rump is not decoration. The skin beneath it is unusually thick, and the leading theory is that it is armor, positioned exactly where a predator that misjudges its speed will strike. That speed reaches around 25 kilometers an hour in short bursts through dense undergrowth. It builds a nest of leaves on the forest floor, sleeps in it, and then builds another one somewhere else. Pairs hold a territory together and defend it together, but they forage alone and rarely touch. Perhaps 13,000 remain. The same forest holds one of the smallest owls in the world, 17 centimeters tall, which nests only in the natural cavities of old hardwood trees and calls in the dark in a voice that carries much further than the bird's size suggests. Both of them depend on the same thing: old trees, standing where they have always stood. South of here, the coast runs on. Watamu, where the reef comes close enough to swim to. Diani, with its white sand and its colobus monkeys crossing the road on rope bridges. And Mombasa, the country's oldest city and its harbour, where the Portuguese raised Fort Jesus in 1593 to hold the sea lane to India, and lost it, and took it back, and lost it again. Now the mountain. It stands almost exactly on the equator, and it is the second highest thing in Africa, 5,199 meters. Its summit is a pair of black rock spires called Batian and Nelion, and they are not the mountain's peak in the ordinary sense. They are its throat. 3 million years ago, this was a single volcanic cone, and it may have stood nearer to 7,000 meters. What happened next was ice. Glaciers ground the cone away, layer by layer, over millions of years, until all that was left standing was the hardened plug of lava that had solidified inside the vent. The mountain you can see today is the inside of the mountain that used to be there. The Kikuyu call it Kirinyaga. It is where Ngai lives. Traditional homesteads were built with the door facing it, and prayers were made facing it. And the reason a mountain on the equator became the address of a god is not hard to understand once you have seen it appear out of cloud at dawn. And here is the contradiction that defines it. A mountain sitting on the equator in a country most people picture as hot grass has carried permanent ice through the entire span of human history. Every ancestor in this documentary lived under a sky that had that white shape somewhere in it. In 1899, surveyors counted 18 glaciers on Mount Kenya. By 2004, there were 10. The largest of them, the Lewis Glacier, has lost around 90% of its volume since the 1930s. Between 2014 and 2016, it split into two separate pieces. What is left of the ice on this mountain covers roughly 4% of the area it covered in 1900, and the current projections put the mountain entirely ice-free by around 2030. Not in a century, within a handful of years. Mount Kenya would then become one of the first mountains in the world to lose its glaciers completely to a warming climate. There are guides working on it now in their 60s who, as young men, were frightened of crossing that ice, and who take clients up to look at 2 blocks of it a few dozen meters wide. The strangeness of the place does not end at the ice. Between about 3,500 and 4,500 meters, the mountain grows plants that look like a mistake. Giant lobelias standing 2 meters tall like green obelisks. Groundsels the size of small trees. Nothing else in the world looks quite like this except the equivalent zone on 2 or 3 other African peaks. The reason is a climate almost nobody experiences. Up here, it is summer every single day and winter every single night, all year round. The temperature crosses freezing twice in 24 hours, more than 700 times a year. So the plants insulate themselves. The giant lobelia holds a reservoir of fluid in the center of its rosette. At night, that fluid freezes on the surface and forms a lid of ice over the growing tip, which keeps the living bud at a survivable temperature underneath. The groundsels never shed their dead leaves. They keep them wrapped around the trunk as a jacket. These are not decorative species. They are engineering solutions to a problem almost no other plants on Earth have to solve. And below them, the mountain's other function. Mount Kenya is a water tower. Rain and melt run off its flanks into streams that feed the Tana, the longest river in the country, and the Ewaso Nyiro, which runs north into the dry lands. Millions of people, and a large share of Kenya's electricity generation, depend on what comes off these slopes. Along the Naramoru River, which drains the western side, most households now report that the flow has dropped within their own lifetimes. 60 kilometers west of the mountain, there is a second range, dark with cedar and bamboo, permanently wet, cut with ravines. The Aberdares. And the history that ended in these forests begins with land. From the early 1900s, the colonial administration reserved the best farmland in the Kenyan highlands for European settlement. It was known without embarrassment as the White Highlands. Kikuyu families who had farmed that ground were moved onto reserves that could not hold them, and within a generation, there was a large population with no land and no legal route to any. The pressure had nowhere to go, and in 1952, it went into the forests. The 20th of October, 1952. The governor, Evelyn Baring, signs a declaration of a state of emergency. Within days, the leadership of the main African political party is arrested, including Jomo Kenyatta, who is convicted on evidence that is later shown to have been perjured. What follows is 8 years long. Fighters of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army operate from the Aberdares and the slopes of Mount Kenya under a field commander named Dedan Kimathi. The colonial response is not primarily a military campaign in the forest. It is a system of detention. Something in the order of 150,000 people are held in a network of camps known as the pipeline, built to break the movement through forced labor and what the administration called rehabilitation. Well over 1 million Kikuyu are moved into guarded villages. 1,090 people are executed by hanging. In March 1959, at a camp called Hola, guards beat 11 detainees to death. The scandal reaches the British Parliament. Kimathi is captured on the 21st of October, 1956, and hanged at Kamiti Prison on the 18th of February, 1957. He was 36. Kenya became independent in 1963. It took another 50 years before the British government, in 2013, settled with 5,228 surviving Kenyan claimants and funded a memorial in Uhuru Park in Nairobi to the victims of torture in the colonial era. It was unveiled in 2015. Most of the people it commemorates did not live to see it. There is a woman in this story who was a schoolgirl in Nyeri at the foot of Mount Kenya, while the forests above her were burning. Her name was Wangari Maathai. She was born in 1940 in a village called Ihithe. Girls in her circumstances did not go to school, and she went because an older brother argued for it. She became the first woman from East or Central Africa to earn a doctorate in 1971, and she taught veterinary anatomy at the University of Nairobi. And then she did something that gets described wrongly as an environmental campaign. In 1977, she began planting trees with rural women. Not for scenery. The women had come to her with a list of practical failures. Firewood was now hours away. The streams they had drawn from as children ran brown or ran dry. The soil in their fields would not hold. Every one of those problems traced back to the same missing thing. So the Greenbelt movement paid women a small amount for every seedling that survived. It was a jobs program, a water program, a food program, and a forestry program at once. And over the following decades, it put more than 51 million trees into the ground. What it also became was a fight about who owns a country. In 1999, 1,000 hectares of forest on the northern edge of Nairobi were being carved up for private development. Maathai went there with supporters and seedlings, and they were attacked on the ground with clubs and whips. She was injured. The photographs went around the world, and the allocations were abandoned. Karura Forest is still standing. People run in it on weekday mornings. She was elected to Parliament in 2002, and in 2004, she became the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She died in 2011. She had been told more than once that she would never do any of it. Far to the east of all this, in dry thorn country near the Somali border, there is an animal that most Kenyans have never seen. The hirola is a slender antelope with lyre-shaped horns and a white line running between its eyes like a pair of spectacles. Its pre-orbital glands are so pronounced that some people call it the four-eyed antelope. It grazes short grass, feeds at dawn and dusk to conserve energy, and can go long stretches without drinking. In the 1970s, there were perhaps 15,000 of them. Today, the estimates run in the low hundreds. It is the rarest antelope on Earth, and it exists nowhere except a strip of land along the Kenya-Somalia border. The Somali population is considered gone. What makes the hirola's situation unusual is that its entire range falls outside the national park system. There is no gate, no fence, no ranger post that covers it by design. If the hirola survives, it will not be because a park protected it. In 2012, the Somali community at Ishagbini fenced off a predator-free sanctuary on their own land and moved a founding group of animals into it. The population inside has been climbing. Between the places this documentary has room for, there is a country. North of Mount Kenya, the Ewaso Nyiro cuts a green line through Samburu, and the animals along it are the dry country versions of the ones everybody knows. Reticulated giraffe, Grevy's zebra with pinstripes instead of bands, the geranuk, which stands on its hind legs to browse. Further north, the Chalbi Desert takes over, a bed of white salt and clay that was a lake within the memory of the ground. Beyond it, the Suguta Valley records some of the highest surface temperatures anywhere on Earth. In the southeast, Tsavo runs for 20,000 square kilometers, and its elephants are red because they dust themselves in the local soil until they take its color. Further west, Amboseli sits under Kilimanjaro, which is not in Kenya at all and dominates the horizon anyway. Near Lake Victoria, at Thimlik Ohinga, there are stone enclosures built without mortar, some of them walls of 1.5 meters of fitted rock, standing for centuries with nothing holding them but their own geometry. And in the far west, Kakamega Forest is the last Kenyan fragment of the great rainforest belt that once stretched to the Atlantic. All of it in one country, and all of it inside 4 degrees of the equator. Now, back north. 900 kilometers from the steam pipes of Hell's Gate on the eastern shore of Lake Turkana. Loyangalani means the place of many trees, which tells you something about the standards here. It is a scatter of buildings on black lava, and it exists because of a spring. The wind at this end of the lake is constant and hard. The rift funnels air between two highland masses and accelerates it day and night at speeds and reliabilities that are rare anywhere on the planet. 365 turbines now stand on the ridges above the town, the largest wind farm on the continent and the largest single private investment in Kenya's history. So here is where the number from Hell's Gate comes back. The rock at 350 degrees under Olkaria and the wind screaming across this lake are the same fact. Both of them exist because the continent is tearing open along this line. Kenya now draws the large majority of its electricity from renewable sources, and the reason is not policy alone. It is that the country happens to be standing on a geological wound that leaks energy in two directions at once. And on the shore below the turbines is the smallest community in Kenya. The El Molo call themselves the people of the lake. They are not pastoralists like the Turkana or the Samburu around them. They fish from small craft with nets and harpoons for tilapia and for Nile perch that can outweigh the fishermen. Their houses are low domes of stick and palm. Depending on how you count, and the counting is contested, there may be a few hundred people of unmixed El Molo descent left. The language is effectively gone. The water they drink carries so much fluoride that it stains and weakens their teeth, and over a lifetime, their bones. And then, the lake rose. Around 2020, the same rise that flooded Baringo and Nakuru reached Turkana. It came up over the sand spit that connected one El Molo village to the shore and turned it into an island. Families were separated. Children stopped attending school because the boat fare was beyond their parents, and the school's own fence and latrines went under. Crocodiles moved into the shallows where the playground had been. Now, I want to be careful about a phrase because it gets used about this basin constantly, and it is doing a lot of quiet damage. The cradle of humankind. It is a comfortable phrase. It suggests a single room, a single beginning, a place you could put a plaque on. And the ground here does not support it. Human ancestry was not born in one valley and dispersed outward like a story with a first page. It was a wide, messy, continent-scale process, running for millions of years across regions that were sometimes connected and sometimes not. And the oldest remains of our own species have come out of North Africa, thousands of kilometers from here. What the Turkana Basin has is not a birthplace. It is a record. The longest, deepest, best-dated sequence of that process anywhere on the planet, preserved by an accident of geology and read by people who chose to spend their lives on their hands and knees in the heat. And the El Molo, who live on top of the most studied archive of human origins in the world, are watching their own record end inside 2 generations. Which brings us finally to the West Shore. The Turkana Basin is roughly the size of a small country, and for the last 60 years, it has been one of the most intensively searched landscapes on Earth. The reason is the thing we established at the beginning. Sediment came in, ash sealed it, the floor kept dropping, the faults kept tilting, and the rains kept cutting. The result is a stack of dated pages running back beyond 4 million years, tipped on its side and opened. Tens of thousands of fossils have come out of it. Thousands of them are hominin. Not one species, but a crowd of them, overlapping in time, some of them almost certainly sharing a shoreline. On the eastern side, at a place called Kubifora, teams working from 1968 onward pulled out skulls that rewrote the textbooks every few years. A large-brained cranium with a flat face. A robust vegetarian cousin with a crest along the top of its head for anchoring enormous jaw muscles. A small, delicate skull that Kamoya Kimeu found in 1973, which is still one of the best specimens of the earliest members of our own genus. For most of the last century, the story told about these fossils had a spine to it. Brains grew, hands freed up, and at some point, a creature with a large enough brain picked up a stone, struck it against another, and made the first tool. That moment was supposed to be the door we walked through. The genus Homo was, by definition, the tool maker, handyman. Then a team took a wrong turn. It is July 2011, on the western side of the lake. A field crew is driving to a site they have worked before, and somewhere along the dry riverbeds, they miss a branch and end up in the wrong drainage. They stop. They are here now, so they may as well look. They walk a hillside of pale sediment, and they begin finding stone that is not shaped the way stone in that hillside should be shaped. Not weathered, struck. Cores with flakes removed from them in a deliberate sequence, and the flakes themselves and the hammerstones and anvils used to do it, all sitting in the layer where they were dropped. The site is named Lomekwi 3. The ash above and below it gives a date of 3.3 million years. That is 700,000 years older than any stone tool previously known. And it is older than our genus. There was no Homo yet. Whoever knelt on that ground and worked those cores was something else, something more ancient, and they were doing it with a technique that suggests a genuine grasp of how rock fractures. The pieces are large. Some were held in two hands, others were rested on an anvil and struck, which quietly removes the door we thought we walked through. Toolmaking was not the invention that made us. It was already happening out here on this lake shore, long before anything you would call a human existed. And that is the ground we have been walking toward. Nariokotome, August 1984. A grey slope beside a dry river and a piece of skull the size of a matchbox. What came out of that hillside over the following years was catalogued as KNM WT 15,000. Almost every major bone, the skull, the jaw, the teeth, the vertebral column, the ribs, the pelvis, the arms, the legs. Only the hands and the feet were missing. Nothing like it had been found before. Almost everything known about the anatomy of early humans had been assembled from fragments. A jaw here, a thigh bone there, borrowed across individuals and across continents. Here was one person, complete enough to measure. He died somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6 million years ago. His teeth put him at roughly 8 to 12 years old. He already stood over 1.5 meters, and the growth plates in his long bones had not fused, so he was not finished. He was tall, narrow-hipped, long-legged, and lightly built, with a body that in silhouette would read as unmistakably human at 50 paces. That build is not an accident either. Long legs and a narrow trunk make an efficient walker and a tolerable runner. A body with more surface area than bulk sheds heat. This is the anatomy of something that could move across open country in the middle of the day, in this climate, and keep going. The difference is inside the skull. His brain was around 880 cubic centimeters and would have reached perhaps 910 as an adult. A modern human of his size would carry something closer to 1,350. so the body arrived first. The head took another 1.5 years. As for how he died, the honest answer is that nobody knows. Several explanations have been proposed over the decades: an infection in the jaw, a defect in the spine, and each of them has been argued down by later work. What can be said is where he ended. He came to rest face down in the mud at the margin of a swamp on the edge of a much larger lake, and the mud held him, and the ash sealed him, and the basin kept dropping for 1.5 million years until the rain cut him back out into the light. He was found by a man walking slowly, looking at his feet. Kamoya Kimeu was born in 1938 in the Kamba country of Makueni, and he joined a fossil hunting expedition as a young laborer. He had no degree. What he had was an ability to distinguish a hominin bone fragment from 1,000 pieces of identical-looking rubble at walking pace. And over 4 decades, that ability produced a list of finds that few credentialed scientists have matched. The Peninge mandible in 1964, the Homo habilis skull at Kubi Fora in 1973, the most complete early human skeleton ever recovered in 1984. In 1977, he was appointed curator of all prehistoric sites for the National Museums of Kenya. In 1985, the National Geographic Society gave him its Lagos Medal. He was later awarded an honorary doctorate. He died in Nairobi in July 2022 in his 80s. The papers announcing his discoveries carried other names first. That was the convention of the discipline, and it took a long time to shift. But the pattern underneath it is worth naming plainly. The record of human origins in this country was not simply found by visiting expeditions. It was found and cleaned and catalogued and protected in very large part by Kenyans on Kenyan ground, working for a Kenyan institution. The archive of everybody has a local staff. It is worth trying to hold the whole shape of this in one thought, because the pieces are not separate. The crack running under this country made the valley made the lakes, and the lakes went caustic, and 1 million birds arrived to eat the only thing that would grow in them. The crack put molten rock close enough to the surface to boil groundwater, and that steam now runs the capital. It squeezes the wind between 2 highlands and turns 365 rotors on a desert ridge. It grew the volcanoes whose ash built the mineral soil that the wildebeest carve on. It raised a mountain high enough to carry ice on the equator, and it dropped a basin deep enough to swallow and preserve 1.5 million years of weather, bone, and stone.
And it is not finished.
The plates have not stopped. In some distant future, the sea will come up this valley, and Kenya's eastern edge will be an island. Nothing about the current arrangement is permanent, including the parts that feel like scenery. What is unusual about this country is not that it has a deep past. Everywhere has a deep past. What is unusual is that here the past is legible. Most of the planet buried its evidence or ground it to powder. This one strip of Africa kept the pages in order, dated them, and then tipped them up where a person could walk along them and read. Which makes the losses stranger to sit with. A mountain that carried ice through every year of human existence will probably be bare within the decade. A lake that recorded our origins is rising over the houses of the people who fish it. A community whose name means the people of the lake may not have a language left in a generation. The archive is intact. Some of what it recorded is going. And there is the boy, in a case in Nairobi. Not an ancestor of Kenyans particularly, not an ancestor of Africans particularly. On the timescale he belongs to, the categories we sort ourselves into had not been invented and would not be for another million years. He was a child who walked upright on long legs across open ground in the heat, who probably carried water, who almost certainly knew the people around him by something like a name. He died young, on the edge of a swamp, for reasons no one has been able to establish, and everyone alive today is descended from a population that included his relatives. Down on the valley floor, in the dust of the season, there is a small black insect doing the oldest job on the plain. The dung beetle finds fresh droppings within minutes, sometimes seconds. It cuts a portion, works it into a ball, and rolls it backwards, using its hind legs, over ground littered with obstacles, in a dead straight line away from the pile. Straight, because straight is the fastest way out of a fight, and a beetle that turns will meet a beetle that has not. It navigates by the sky, by the sun's position, by the pattern of polarized light around it, and on moonless nights, by the faint band of the Milky Way. It buries the ball, lays an egg in it, and leaves. Between them, the beetles of a savanna will bury a large fraction of everything the herds leave behind, taking nitrogen underground, aerating the soil, and interrupting the life cycles of parasites in the process. The lineage has been doing this for something like 30 million years. It was doing it when the lake was full, when the ash fell, when the first stone was struck at Lamekwi, and on the afternoon, the boy lay down at Nariokotome. Nothing about our arrival changed its schedule. Nothing about our departure would. Perhaps what matters about Kenya is not that humanity began here, because that is a tidier sentence than the ground can support. It is that here, and almost nowhere else, the earth agreed to keep the receipts. A country of grass and steam and salt water, holding the only continuous account we have of how we came to be the kind of animal that would want to know. And the rest of us have been walking around for a long time now, on ground that never wrote any of it down. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until the next journey.